SDP, Staff Development Program, it is possible because, or it has been possible because of the COVID itself. Only thing is we had to seek the opportunity in the crisis and we had to pursue our effort in the direction. I'm so happy about it. But unfortunately, because this is a virtual session, online session, you may not be able to see BMSIT's Green Campus, beautiful campus, largely contributed by the green initiatives and green associations of our organization, like OIKIS. And we may not be able to extend very great hospitality, which we are known for actually. That is also not possible. But anyway, you have to bear with all these things because we are in the process of gaining some additional skills and knowledge in this staff development program. Okay, fine. Now, at the very outset, I must congratulate the Department of Civil Engineering, HOD, Dr. Rajesh Gopinath, and the coordinators, and all my colleagues from this department who have done a wonderful job all through. In fact, specifically, I have sincere appreciations to them because they have not given up the tradition of conducting staff development program. Everybody else conducts the faculty development programs, but these people, apart from faculty development program, they have ventured into the staff development program also online. And naturally, it poses so many challenges to conduct a staff development program simply because it is not just the transfer of knowledge, but also we need to transfer certain observable skills. Okay, or skills that can be codified or embodied into people over a period of time. I think that, or at least I'm sure that my civil engineering department must have planned such kind of live video sessions also for you people to see how the experiments are to be done, how the programs are to be written, all such kind of things. I'm sure that that will benefit you a lot. Dear colleagues, in fact, today's world and the days to come, henceforth, at least in the near future, the roles of every individual is changing. Not just the faculty members, but also you all, even the staff members, have to redefine their own roles. Now, when the students are not there on the campus, how are you going to conduct experiments in your laboratories? This is a big question. Does that mean that your services are now rendered waste? No, it may not be. The only thing is you have to change your outlook to the situation and plan your activities accordingly. For instance, in the days to come, we all expect to have at least a few virtual laboratories. Okay, virtual laboratories. That means the laboratories which can be, or the experiments in those laboratories can be conducted by the students sitting at home, but the laboratories will be here in the campus. And can we make that possible? And there could be some kind of remote engineering laboratories. Actually, when virtual laboratories can be held in the digital branches or maybe digital kind of courses, actually core engineering courses need the remote engineering laboratories. Sitting at home, they must be able to operate the equipment in the laboratory in the campus there. Can you think of these kinds of adaptations that are necessary for us? I'm sure that you'll all be working this direction to see how best to make this happen, and hoping that students will come back as early as possible. You should also be working towards how to actually conduct the experiments more effectively, because you may not have one full semester to conduct all the experiments there. You may be having very less time, but you need to accommodate more number of experiments. But effectiveness of your experiment should remain the same. How do you do this is the question. How do you design your experiments, conduct your experiments, make sure that students practice it? Okay, how do you use ICT, that is information communication technologies, to make this happen? How do you design open-ended experiments so that students can try out at home itself, so that they will gather some kind of an experience in designing the experiments and conducting it, taking their own kind of readings, analyzing it on their own, interpreting the kind of results that they get or findings that they get from the experiments. These are all real challenges that are confronting us. Okay, and you also need to be supporting your faculty members in doing the research and development activities, students in doing their innovative activities. Okay, lots of consultancy things have to happen in the colleges. That means you are as good as, if not more important, as if not more good, right? as good as faculty members, as important as faculty members in every college. Do not relegate yourselves to the second level. You are equal to them. But now the question is, how can you perform equal to them or even better than them? Is the question. I'm sure that this particular staff development program has got wonderful speakers lined up, and many of them could be the very experienced technical staff members. Maybe I'm just guessing it, okay? And I'm sure that there would be interactions, but the number is very large. May not be so easy to have an interaction, but there are mechanisms: raising the hand, asking questions, and speakers answering them. And recorded videos might be available. Online sessions can be recorded and shared with you. Of course, there are many plus points here. I'm sure that you people will be taking advantage of all features of these kinds of Google Meet and other things to enhance your skills. I'm sure that all that you gather here, you'll take it back in the form of valuable takeaways, share it with your colleagues, students, everybody, so that your institutions can also do very well, very much like BMSIT. And I'm sure that together we can all contribute to this country, our own nation, Mother India. I'm sure that all these things take a good shape in the next few days. I think 3 days program, if I'm right. Okay, hope you will have a wonderful sessions. All the best. Good luck to you. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your kind words. And as you stated, yes, we have experts from IITs. We also have senior technical staff who will be engaging sessions, and our own technical staffs are also equipped, and they also have recorded several videos under your guidance, and all those videos are in our YouTube channel. We'll be exploring all the ICT tools as per your guidance and instructions, sir. Once again, we thank you for your kind words and motivation.
At this stage,
yes, sir.
At this stage, I also want to intervene and tell you, now please get the profiles of all the participants online, maybe if possible today, through your Google form, and see how many of them are highly experienced over there. There could be people who are good enough to share wonderful knowledge with you people also. Get them involved in the process of interaction, okay, and also exchange the knowledge. Let everybody benefit with everybody else's skills and knowledge. Okay, I hope you will do that. Thank you.
Definitely, sir. Definitely, sir. We shall incorporate this corrective measure also. Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you, sir. Now, I would request Anthony, sir, who is a senior lab in charge, to speak few words about our SDP. Thank you, sir. Anthony, sir. Sir is here.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning to you all.
Good morning, everyone. As the saying goes, learning gives creativity, creativity leads to thinking, thinking provides knowledge, knowledge makes you great. These were the sayings of Dr. Abdul Kalam. With this primary objective of learning and acquiring of knowledge, we came up with this thought of conducting a training program. In the year 2019, we conducted a program wherein the skills related to safe hygiene practices in lab, fire safety, exposure to latest tools such as hands-on sessions in total station, non-destructive testing were dealt to strengthen and improve the skill set and knowledge. The SDP, which was conducted for the first time, 2019, saw very good participation from the engineering institutes, industry labs, and polytechnics was very well received and appreciated. Although this pandemic has created a lot of challenges at present, but this has not stopped us for progressing ahead and conducting the staff development program this year. But the only change is that the program is happening in the online or virtual mode with the same intensity what had happened during the last year. I'm sure you all will gain ample knowledge at the end of this program. I wholeheartedly would like to thank each one of you who have encouraged us by registering and joining to this staff development program. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony, sir. Ma'am, namaste.
Yes.
So, with the kind permission of both the speakers, shall we start?
Yeah, we can start.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon once again to all the participants of the Technical Online Staff Development Program. Today we are all very honored because for this afternoon session you have not one but you have two experts the best in the field, and definitely this session will be very useful and benevolent, because most of the laboratories would not be having the facilities that the speakers will be delving upon. I take this opportunity to welcome my two resource persons. First, I would like to welcome Dr. Praveen Ghorpade sir. Sir is basically working as an associate professor in Department of Civil Engineering, KLE SCET Belgaum. He has completed his doctorate in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Hanyang University, South Korea. I'm also happy to share that he has his master's in environmental engineering. Also, he did his bachelor's in chemical engineering. He has 2 patents to his credit and has about 8 SCI publications. And he's also a recipient of the Best Research Award for the year 2014 from Hanyang University, Seoul. Now I shall move on to Madam. Okay, Professor Naina. Ma'am is working currently as an assistant professor in Department of Civil Engineering at KLE MS Sheshgiri College of Engineering. Now, Madam has also worked as head of the department in RN Shetty Polytechnic, Belagavi. With this brief introduction to 2 great stalwarts, I would like to thank Praveen sir. At short notice, sir accepted our invitation, and I'm pretty hopeful that this session will be very useful. And I would like to tell you that I have also undergone the session with Praveen sir, and I found it very useful. I had learned a lot, so I believe it's going to help you all as well. Thank you, sir. I would like to inform you that we are recording this session and we'll be uploading into YouTube. So I hope I have your permission for that.
Yeah, you can do that. Okay.
Thank you, sir. So now I, hand over this scene to the 2 professors. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the introduction, what you gave. And happy to see you back after a number of years. Yeah. So what we have decided is I will be taking some part of this session, and then Naina Madam will continue with some other instrumental techniques.
Yes.
So we have divided the sessions. Okay, and I request all of you to feel free to ask questions if you have any doubts. Okay, we will keep it a very friendly session, not bore you. Okay, so if with everybody's permission, I would like to start a presentation first. What we have planned is we will be discussing some operational principles of some of those instruments which are used in environment field. Due to time limitation, we might not cover everything, but then yeah, we will try to cover something which is very new for you. And then Madam will be presenting on some instrumentation part, along with we have done some video recordings of actual, you may get that hands-on training, something like that. Now you might not practically do it, but then virtually, yeah, definitely it will help you. So if you have any doubts, you can of course ask. It could be an interactive session. So before I start, I would like to thank the management of BMSIT, and especially special thanks to Rajesh Gopinath sir and Simna Manoharan sir and Anthony Raj sir. They have been in constant touch with us, and I know how difficult it is to organize any particular event. So congratulations to you, and at the same time, we both would like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to interact with you people there in Bangalore. So with your permission, I would like to start the presentation.
Yes, sir. Please, sir. Thank you, sir. No, sir, just get to, once sir starts presenting it, no?
Yeah, you can see the screen now. Hello.
हाँ sir, दिखाई दे रहा है. We can see the screen.
Okay. All of you are comfortable with this screen?
Yes, sir. Perfect. Sir, maybe the lower part of the PPT is not visible because of the participants' presence in your system.
Is it? 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
Is it okay now?
So I think your layout, the
1 minute. Change the page. Now is it okay?
ठीक है सर.
अभी दिख रहा है? नहीं, आप बोलिए, क्योंकि if something is wrong, tell me now only, because otherwise some things in explanation might not go well.
Yeah, I still feel there's a last part of the slide. So, for example, now we cannot see College of Engineering and Technology Belgavi. That one line is hidden.
Okay. That's fine. Okay. Rest all you can see on top.
Rest we can see.
Yeah.
Sir.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Anyway, that's most of the slides you will not get to that level. Okay. Anyway.
Okay.
Let me start with the presentation. It's a skill enhancement in civil engineering laboratory, and as far as civil engineering laboratories are concerned, one of the important labs in this is environmental engineering. What is basic issues what we have in environmental engineering laboratory, or for that matter any civil engineering laboratory, is we do analysis or we do experimentation with only those things which are given in prescribed syllabus. For that matter, we are affiliated to VTU and you people are autonomous now. So probably there are some changes in your syllabus, but then we restrict ourselves to some of those techniques, especially in water quality analysis, or it could be any environmental parameter analysis. When it comes to analysis, we restrict ourselves to all those facilities which are given by prescribed authority in a syllabus. And that is where it brings limitation in terms of understanding what all different instrumentation techniques are available. So that is the first hindrance what we have. And when you look into field of environmental engineering, it is so vast field that they use so many instrumental techniques, and there is so much to learn in this particular area. So fortunately, I came across some of those instrumental techniques which I happened to work on, and I felt I should share some of those things rather than sharing some traditional things of environmental engineering laboratory. So this entire PPT, what we have planned is taking into consideration the practical aspects of analysis of environmental parameters. So I would like to acknowledge BMSIT and entire team for giving this opportunity to interact with you people. If you look at this particular slide, different instrumental techniques in environmental engineering, we have categorized this into 3 different categories where I felt that some of these things are very important. When we speak about instrumental techniques, those are broadly classified into, there are a number of other instrumental techniques also, but then looking into this, there is something called spectrophotometry, which works on a concept of absorbance and transmittance of light, basically. And you have Raman spectroscopy in that. You have Fourier infrared spectroscopy, mass force spectroscopy is there, atomic absorption spectroscopy is there, and you have flame photometry. Basically, this all work on a spectroscopic concepts. Then you have chromatographic technique. We speak of TLC, it is called as thin layer chromatography, HPLC, high performance liquid chromatography, gas chromatography is GC, and then GC is installed, GC is associated with another instrumental techniques, GCMS, we call it as gas chromatography and mass spectra. So basically you can calculate the mass of the chemical also. And apart from this, there are some other instrumental techniques like X-ray diffraction techniques. You have X-ray fluorescence technique, SEM-IDAX, where basically you can check the morphology of any mineral. Then there is something called thermogravimetric analysis. Now, the last part which is given in the instrumental technique, it is basically linked to materials part of it. Most of you who are involved in the building material testing, now we do compressive testing and some other testing which is linked to your strength part of it. But especially big area is there wherein you understand how mineralogically some things are changing. There were these are basic instrumental techniques which are used in analysis like X-ray, XRD, and XRF. Basically, XRD gives you mineralogical characterization, XRF will give you elemental composition. Thermogravimetric analysis is used to find out the chemical composition. Likewise, chromatographic techniques and spectroscopic techniques, when we speak about all these techniques, they are widely used in water and wastewater analysis. Now, as I was discussing, that most of the time our syllabus is not designed so that we will not come across this type of instrumental techniques. So what we have decided is I will be taking up a part on gas chromatography, which is a very powerful tool in analysis. And Madam will be, if I get time, I will explain you TGA also. And Madam will be dealing with spectrophotometer and flame photometer. So this is what we have planned for this 1 hour session. So looking at this particular slide, you can see that entire picture of gas chromatography is represented here. And looking at different parts of gas chromatography, what basically gas chromatography means. So you see before Christ era, when you see this, when people used to travel in desert area, and they had their own purification techniques for water purification. They used to take a column of sand and pass water through it, and turbid water used to get cleared. So what is this basically? When turbid water is getting cleared, when you pass it through a column of sand, basically sand acts like a filter media, and clear water will come on the other side of the column. So what is this technique called as? This technique is basically called as separation technique. So chromatography basically speaks of separation technology. So when you are separating two components from a mixture, when you have mixture of some components and you're separating those components, that technique is called as separation technique, is called as chromatographic techniques. And in this case, you are using gas for separation. Basically, this gas acts like a carrier. Basically, the gas which is used in gas chromatographic techniques is inert gas. They use inert gas like nitrogen. Basically, they use a gas like nitrogen because this nitrogen will not react with any of the chemicals, or helium. Okay, so they use helium or nitrogen basically for carrier gas. So you can see the cylinder which is there. Usually this gas will be either of nitrogen or helium, and this gas will be carrying the composition which you are supposed to analyze. So this gas also is required so that it will carry the material or the composition which is in combined state, which will be coming inside this particular system. So gas chromatography has different parts in that. So very first thing is a carrier gas. So carrier gas, usually it will be nitrogen or helium, either of this. It also depends on what type of analysis you are doing. I will explain you that it depends on type of detectors what you have. Suppose you want to have flame in a system, then it is called as flame ionization detector. There is something called FID detector. In that case, you have to ignite the flame. So when you are igniting the flame, in that case, along with air, they use hydrogen as a gas. So in that case, mixture of air and hydrogen will be passed into the column. Okay, it depends on the type of chromatographic technique, gas chromatographic technique you are using. So you need to maintain the flow or pressure in this particular column. This is what is called as column of the gas chromatography. You need to maintain a particular pressure, because unless this flow is regulated, you cannot regulate the thing which is going inside and coming outside. So that gas flow has to be regulated, and this will be done with a flow or a pressure control valve which will be given at the end of the cylinder, and there will be a connection for this. From this, a gas will come here, especially now we are speaking of inert gas like nitrogen. Now when you come to injector, this is an injector where you are injecting the sample inside the gas chromatography, okay, or gas chromatograph column basically. So when you are having an injector, this injector is basically taking a sample which is mixture of samples, okay, and gas chromatographic techniques can be used to analyze the liquid composition, especially organic compounds and other things, or sometimes it is used to analyze a gaseous composition also. So you are injecting that liquid component mixture inside this, and you want to find out what all things are there in that particular liquid component. So basically, once you inject this, from this side there is a gas which is entering, and from this side there is a sample which is entering. Now what basically happens is, this gas which is entering, it should not react with the sample what you are injecting, and that is the reason why you end up choosing inert gas. Now they will flow together in this particular column. They will flow together in this particular column. Now this area, what you see in a blue color, it is called as O1. It is called as O1 of the gas chromatography. So basically in this particular closed section, the temperature of this O1 will be maintained. So somewhere around 300 degrees, up to, it can go up to 300 degrees centigrade. So O1 has a temperature of up to 300 degrees centigrade. So you can control this temperature, and this will be programmed. Basically you can control this entire temperature up to 300. So you can start from room temperature and you can go up to 300 degrees centigrade. Now what happens when you inject this sample inside the column? This column, basically, now what is it is having? It is having a mixture of gas which is coming, and then the sample which is having multiple component mixture in it. So once it enters into the column, this column is basically inside part of this column is basically either made up of solids. It is either made up of solid or liquid. So if it is made up of liquid, then the name will change to gas liquid chromatography. You remember that? If the stationary phase, this phase which is there inside the column is called as stationary phase. That means it is stable and stationary. It is not going to move. So inside part of the column is made up of either solid or liquid, which is a stationary phase. And what stationary phase they choose? The stationary phase will be chosen which will have very high boiling point. Remember this. Now we are discussing something called boiling point. So stationary phase will have very high boiling point, because you know that column temperatures can go up to 300 degrees centigrade. If the low boiling point stationary phase is chosen, then it is likely to come out of a system. So they choose very high boiling point solid or liquid phase, which is a stationary phase inside the column. What happens? Now we have seen that mixture of this sample and gas has entered inside. The sample, once it enters inside, it will have affinity towards either the solid or liquid. Either this one thing will be there inside the column, depending upon whether the gas chromatography is having solids or it is liquid chromatography. If it is liquid, then it will have liquid. Now what happens? Suppose there is a component which is coming in this particular sample, which is A plus B. Suppose this is a component, okay, which is having A plus B. Now A will have more affinity towards one particular this solid phase, which is stationary phase in the column, or A might have more affinity towards, if it is having liquid, it will have affinity towards liquid. Either of one of these things will be present. Now what happens? This A goes and gets attached to that particular column, whereas B is having less affinity, so it will easily come out. So what they do is, this coming out of A or B, it will be in vapor form. It will be in vapor form. Suppose you are putting it in a liquid form, the temperature at the inlet of this will be very high, so that this liquid will be converted into gaseous form, and then this in a vapor form, and this vapor and this inert gas will start flowing inside the column. And now those vapors will get attached to this particular solid which is present inside the column, and it will get attached to that stationary phase. Now what happens? Slowly, initially the temperature of the column will be kept less. Suppose, for example, initially the column temperature is 70 degrees centigrade. Now what happens? Some chemicals will come and attach to this particular solid media which is there inside the column, and this chemical A, suppose this chemical A comes and get attached to this solid here at 70 degrees centigrade, and B is not having affinity, so slightly B will move ahead of A. Okay, now what happens? B also, if it gets attached, suppose A and B both have got attached at some different levels. Now the boiling point of A, if it is more than 70 degree, or if the boiling point of A, if it is somewhere around 100 degrees centigrade, slowly they increase the temperature of the column. Slowly they increase the temperature of the column, and as soon as this temperature of the column comes to 100, this A will get detached from the system, and it will come in the flow of this particular gas, and then it will come out of this particular column, and it will come to a area where there is a detector which is placed, and this detector will detect this particular A. So A is coming out initially, because it is coming out, it is having less affinity, it will come out compared to B. B has more affinity, or it has higher boiling point, it will stay back inside the column. Then from 100 degree, you will see that you increase the temperature to 110, 120, 130. Likewise, you go on increasing the column temperature. Suppose B is having more temperature. Suppose B is having boiling point which is higher than A. It will come in the form of again vapors at one particular temperature, somewhere around 150 or 160. If it is having that particular temperature, it will come out of that. It will get dissolved out of that particular solid system, and it will come out in a system, in a detector, where it will get detected. Now what is happening in this case is, we are basically calculating the retention time of A and B which are staying inside the column. Now definitely when they came as a mixture inside the column, they came at one particular time, but then A has more affinity or B has more affinity. Depending upon that, and depending upon the temperature of the column, the retention time of A and B will vary. So A will come at one different time and B will come out of the column at some other different time. That will be detected in a detector system. It will be detected in a detector system, and that detector will convert it into electrical systems, which output of that you can get it in the system computer. Now this basic concept is on retention time. That means two different chemicals have different retention time depending upon its boiling point, at the same time affinity towards the solid or liquid phase, which is the stationary phase in the column. So overall, this is the concept of gas chromatography. So what you see in this case is, there is a carrier gas, there is a flow pressure control, because this carrier gas is basically driving this A and B inside the column. Then there is an injector. Basically this injector will push the sample inside the column, and then there is a column. The column will be put inside the oven, and you can control the temperature of the column. I told you how temperature is playing significant role. Then from output, the thing which comes out depending upon the temperature and affinity, we call it as elution. Now it elutes out, it will come out, and then it will get detected in a detector. Detector will give electrical signals that can be recorded in a data system. So this is all how overall the gas chromatography works. So am I audible? Am I clear? Is it going well? Hello?
Yes sir, it's going well. Please go ahead, sir.
You're following? Am I okay with the language?
Yes sir, everybody's okay with you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, then we'll see the next part of the
in chat box.
Sorry.
No, not you, sir. You go ahead, sir, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is how gas chromatography equipment looks like. This is the same instrument on which I worked when I was doing my research. It's gas chromatography 17A, which is made by Shimadzu. Shimadzu is a Japanese company and a very big name in gas chromatography, basically. There are companies like PerkinElmer. There is a company like Agilent. These companies are known for making gas chromatography instruments, basically. Now you can see here in this particular instrument, you can see that you can see that this particular part where you keep the samples, this is a sample holder, and there will be a rotating tray. There will be an arm here which will pick the vials, and it will place it in a sample holder here. So from here it will pick and it will keep it in this, and then it will go inside. This part is called as injector. So basically the injector syringe, what I showed there, this will be present here. It will be moving up and down here, and just below here in this part, just below this, there will be an injector port, and from where the column starts. And in this injector ports, this column will be there inside here. So this part is called as oven part, where the temperature is maintained. And from this, there will be another end of this column which will be connected to this detector. This is called as detector of the gas chromatography. So detectors, there are different types of detectors. I will explain you that. And from here on a control panel, you can control everything. So there will be a gas pipeline which will be coming of nitrogen, or depending upon what you are using. Nitrogen, sometimes if you are using is a flame ionization detector, you require flame there. So you require hydrogen and air mixture. So it will be coming behind and it will be joining in GC. So all that thing what I told in terms of, you can see here, there is a port for gas entry. All those things what I told in terms of pressure control, temperature control, everything you can do it with this particular control panel. At the same time, this gas chromatography will be connected with a laptop or a desktop, from where entire program can be controlled. So this is how that instrument looks like. closer look of that particular sample holder, these vials will be kept like this. Usually these vials will be of 1 ml to 2 ml capacity. The sample which goes inside the column will be 1 microliter. It will be very small syringe, and very part of that it will be going inside. So sample which is required for gas chromatographic analysis is very less. You need to have either gaseous form of sample or you should have liquid form of sample. Gaseous form of a sample is basically, it will go with Henry's law of partitioning coefficient. That means you keep a liquid and the vapors will get generated in a headspace. Now suppose this is a vial, half part of it is liquid and half part will be air. So those all vapors will get generated here sometimes. Okay, and those vapors you can extract it and put it in gas chromatography. That is another way of doing it. You can do gas phase analysis, or if you can inject gaseous form directly by syringe and then put it inside the injector, that is also fine. Okay, so what happens basically is very small percentage of it will go inside the injector, and basically the solvents which are used like hexane and benzene, these are the solvents which are used for analysis. Suppose I want to analyze some parameter, some component in my water. For example, there is some chemical like trichloroethylene, and I want to analyze the percentage of that trichloroethylene present in the water. So what I will do is, I will take the sample of the water and I will put it in hexane, because hexane dissolves that trichloroethylene. And then gas chromatography, when I am putting the sample, it will be along with the solvent. Hexane will go inside along with the trichloroethylene mixture, and that hexane should have affinity to dissolve that particular trichloroethylene. So solvents are chosen on that basis. So liquid systems, when you're analyzing, you should have a good solvent in a system. So once this happens, once the sample gets injected, this is the next part of gas chromatography. I told you that once you open that door of gas chromatography, you can see inside there is a column, and this column will be very thin column actually. This column, very popular columns are HP5 columns, which are very expensive columns, and they will be usually up to 15 to 30 meters long columns will be there, and those will be spirally wound. And one part of that you can see here in this part. This part of the column is connected to the injector. So you can see this, above this there is an injector, and another part of this column will be connected to the detector part. So there will be detector this side. So you can see that spirally wound column will be there inside, and I explained you what happens inside the column. Now working of VC is something like this. I already have given you example how gas chromatography works. I told you that sample will be having mixture of components. Now you can see there is a blue color sample, yellow color sample, and red color sample. Now you can see this towards the stationary phase, this blue color is having more affinity compared to these things. So this will stay back inside the column for a longer time compared to other species. These will not have low, they will have low affinity, and they will easily come out of a column and it will get detected in a detector. So the component which is having more affinity and higher boiling point, I would say, will stay back in a column, and it will come at later stage. It will come out at a longer stage, later stage, okay, than the components which have low affinity. Now, as soon as this comes out, this will get detected initially. So now, originally, this is coming in the form of mixture, but now you see they have got separated. They have got separated, and they will come out easily at different retention time. Okay. Now you see one chemical which is coming out initially. Now, suppose this is the red color chemical which is mixture of that particular thing. Out of that, one particular chemical is coming out initially. That means it is having less retention time. Naturally, you will get the peak of that chemical at lower retention time. So might be that red color.
One second.
I request you.
Sir, 1 second, sir. Shanmugha Mahal, please mute your mic. Shanmugha Mahal. Shanmugha Mahal, is it to me? Yeah. Sir, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is how it is. The red color comes initially out, so you can get a peak of that at a lower retention time. You can see that retention time of this will be initial. Okay, so it is coming out at less retention time, so you will get that peak of that particular chemical at a less retention time. Whereas this blue color might give you peak at the higher retention time. That means this is a graph of the intensity versus time. You can say intensity versus time. Now suppose you have chemical mixtures of multiple component systems. Then hexane is there, butane is there, and benzene is there, and some other organic chemical is there. Now, hexane peak will come first if the hexane is having less affinity, because hexane will be easily thrown out of a column because it is having less affinity, followed by butane, then butane peak will come. That means every time you inject a hexane in a column, or every time you inject a benzene in a column, the retention time for that benzene or the hexane will be fixed. That means it is coming at a fixed time interval, it will come out of a column. So that is first thing, that is where we calculate the retention time of this particular chemical species. Now you see, this is what happens. Now I have injected hexane, and suppose it is coming out of a column at 5 minutes. So I will get one particular peak at 5 minutes like this. Now suppose I increase the concentration of hexane and put it in a system. If I increase the concentration of hexane and put it in a system, again the hexane will come at 5 minutes, but then you can see the peak will be more at 5 minutes. So this peak intensity will be more. So likewise, some other benzene is there. If that benzene comes at somewhere around 14 minutes, then it will be here. Okay, and benzene with more concentration at 14 minutes, again it will be here only at 14 minutes, but then the peak intensity of that will be more. What basically we do in this is we calculate the area under this peak. We calculate the area under this peak. So if I calculate the area under the peak, lesser the area, lower will be the concentration. Higher the area under the peak will be, higher will be the concentration. So you can get a linear plot for this. You can plot a calibration curve wherein one x-axis you can put concentration and y-axis you can put peak area. You can put intensity or peak area you can put it. So you can on a y-axis you can plot peak area. Now you see, as the concentration for 5 ppm, 10 ppm, 15 ppm, if I put pure phases of the samples, then what is going to happen? My peak area is going to get increased linearly, and then you can develop an equation which Naina madam will be explaining you in detail. Y is equal to mx plus c. This you can do it with Excel sheet also, and then you know that x-axis is concentration, y-axis is the peak area. Now unknown sample, when you put it, it will also give you one particular peak area. At that particular peak area, you can find out the unknown concentration of that particular sample. So you can find out the concentration of that particular sample likewise. Okay, so this is how that gas chromatographic concepts work. You should do some things and you should not do some things when you're working with gas chromatography. Every researchers, they have their own backbone instrument. Might be in every lab when you people work on some instruments, you know that the pulse of the instrument will be very important. Some instruments, those they are standard instrument, they have their own ways of working, and we need to take care of it more than your wife or girlfriend, because otherwise, I was doing PhD that time, so I have put, otherwise you'll not complete PhD, or might be in consultancy stages, you might not get a proper result. Okay, so selection of proper gas chromatographic technique is very important. What type of analysis you are doing, what type of instrument you are choosing. I already explained there is some company like PerkinElmer or Shimadzu, Ashland, these are big shots in gas chromatography. There are different types of detectors. I will not go into details of that. There is something called flame ionization detector. Basically, they ignite the flame and they will calculate the signals from that. There is something called thermal conductivity detector. There is something called electron capture detectors. So these are different types of detectors. Electron capture detector, basically they trap the electrons in a plasma region and then they will detect it. Okay, so these are different types of detectors in a detector system. This is how that column looks from inside. Choice of column depends on what type of analysis you are doing. For different pollutants, there are different columns which you can use. So there is a stationary phase. I told you fused silica is very often used for stationary phase, and polyimide coating is given on this particular column. These columns are very expensive, somewhere around 700 to 800, 900 US dollars will the HP5 columns will be costing you in that particular range, standard columns. So this is a column composition. This is how that column exactly looks. Choice of column depends what you're analyzing. So this column is like hairline structure, and you can imagine that inside part of that column is coated. So you can imagine how they must be making this column, and this column should be, should not be having any blockages. Otherwise, it will create a problem. Okay, so that is the reason why the cost of column is very expensive. Mood of the instrument, you need to understand the pulse analysis. It comes with experience when you're working on an instrument for a long time. There is something called conditioning of gas chromatography. Basically, we ramp the GC. Basically, what is this ramping of GC? If I put some sample inside the column, and what if it doesn't come out of this? So sometimes it might happen that you put higher concentration of solution inside that particular gas chromatography. Okay, so unless ramping is what I explained you, lower temperature will be there initially in a column, and then you go to ramp it up to 300 degrees centigrade. At different temperatures, some chemicals will come out. You should not put some chemical inside the column which is having higher boiling point compared to your column capacity. That means maximum temperature of my oven is 300 or 350 degrees. If I put some chemical which will come out at 400, then if you put that chemical inside the column, then your column is contaminated. It will almost spoil. You cannot remove that chemical. Sometimes when we put higher concentration of the column and nothing is, even if you don't inject anything, and if you put high concentration of chemical inside, then also it is going to get contaminated. That means next time when you are operating a column, you'll still see some peak without injecting anything because some chemical is retained inside. In such cases, you should go for ramping of GC, or we call it as conditioning of gas chromatography. Conditioning of gas chromatography is basically where you increase the oven temperature and you will clean the column. That means nothing is left out inside the column. So all the chemicals which are there, they will come out. You need to understand MDL and MDL. I have put minimum detection limit and maximum detection limit. That's what I told you. You should know your column gas chromatography's capacity, that what lowest concentration it can detect and at what highest concentration it can detect. So both are equally important, because if you put too low concentration and if GC is not in a position to give you that peak, then also it is not useful. And if you put too high concentrated solution, I told you what is likely to happen. Column is likely to get contaminated. So column conditions we should know, and that you can get it from literature, different column conditions for different types of chemical. Pure phases should be initially injected. This is a very practical thing in most of the calibration. We do all calibration of all equipments in environment with pure phases. So we will plot a calibration curves with pure phases. Likewise in GC also you have to plot a calibration of pure phase first. Then solvent selection, I told you that you can use solvents like hexane, benzene. These are very commonly used solvents in gas chromatographic techniques. I'll not go into the details of this. You can see that HT5 column, usually it is 30 meters, and internal diameter, you can see it is 0.25 mm diameter ID, and then 0.25 micrometer film thickness will be there in this. And this column was given to us by Agilent Technologies, which we had used. Now you can see that hexane is used as a sample solution wherein you can dissolve that chemical which you want to analyze. And other things which are given. Nitrogen was used as a carrier gas. I told you functioning of carrier gas with a flow rate of 1.5 ml per minute. These are the conditions which we had set for trichloroethylene, basically. So you can see that it was held at 60 degrees for 40 minutes and ramp. This is what is ramping called. So lower temperature to elevated temperatures, what you want, to 150 degrees at a rate of 15 degrees per minute. So you can control at what rate you want to increase the column temperature. And once you do all these things, you should get peaks like this. Normal peaks, if the composition is having a mixture of A plus B plus C, then peaks should not overlap. Those A and B and C should come as a separate peaks. That if you're getting a separate clear peaks, then the conditioning what you have set, or conditions what you have set for the gas chromatography analysis is very right. So you will get 3 different peaks with 3 different mixtures. Then it is ideal condition. Okay. You can see that getting well separated peak is very important. And how will you get this well separated peak? It depends on the retention time and the column condition what you are going into. I have done some calculations, but I think I'll not do that now. It will be difficult. So this is what I wanted to explain about gas chromatography. There is a next technique called thermogravimetric analysis. Are you people following what I'm telling? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It should not go as a bouncer.
No problem.
What we will do is, I will hand over this session to Naina Madam now. She will teach you about spectroscopic analysis and flame photometry analysis. And if time permits, I will take TGA again, thermogravimetric analysis. Okay. Okay. So I'll just hand over this session to Naina Madam. She will be starting with her presentation on spectrophotometry. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. So let's have an overview of what you mean by spectrophotometer. So usually it's an instrument which measures the amount of light that is absorbed by the sample. So on the right side, you can see here the spectrophotometer. So here, this entire box here, the gray colored one, what you are seeing here, this is the place where inside where we keep the samples. And here you have the display unit, and here you have your keypad where you give the instructions to the system. And inside the setup, you can find like a light source and a lens and a photo detector. So assembly will be placed inside this. So I will go with the working principle in the next slide. So these techniques are mostly used to measure how much of salt or the concentration of a solute is present in the solvent. So but this is measured by checking how much of light is absorbed by that salt which is present in the sample. So to keep the sample inside the spectrophotometer, we use a holder called as cuvette, which is made up of quartz. So coming to the working principle, this contains a light source and it contains a lens, and this is a prism which will make the light source to get diffracted into different wavelengths. And here we have a slit. This slit allows a particular wavelength to enter into it. And this is a sample. And I naught here is the incident light ray, and IT is the transmitted light rays. So this photo detector is going to measure you how much of light rays has been transferred from the sample. So if the concentration of the salt is more here, the amount of light absorption will be more, so less amount of light will be transmitted from the system. If the concentration of the salt is less, the amount of light which is absorbed will be less and more light will be transmitted from the system. So this digital display meter will give you the amount of light which is being transmitted. So you can take the reading either in the form of absorbance or in the form of transmittance. So here, whenever the light source is allowed to pass through the lens, it is made to converge and pass it fall it onto the prism. So this prism can be adjusted or directed towards getting split into different wavelength ranges. So we are in the spectrophotometer, we have two wavelength ranges. One is UV range and the other one is visible range. So your UV range works in the wavelength range of 185 to around 200 nanometer, and your visible range works from around 200 to 800 nanometer wavelength range. So now two wavelengths can become when it is clubbed, we call it as UV visible spectrophotometer, or if it's only in the visible range, we call it as visible spectrophotometer. And we have varieties called as single beam and double beam. So single beam usually is off late, it is not used. We always go for double beam. The main difference between the single beam and double beam is single beam, whenever you are using, there will be only one sample holder inside the box. So when the single beam is used, when you keep the sample, the amount of light which is transmitted, only that can be measured. And if you want to know how much of total amount of light is incident, you have to remove the sample and directly measure how much of light is being transmitted. The difference of those two will give you the amount of light which is being absorbed by the sample in case of single beam instruments. In case of double beam instruments, with of late every instrument is having double beam, where both the sample and the reference can be placed at simultaneously. So reference will be having distilled water, where whatever the light is being passed on the cuvette, the entire light is going to get transmitted out, and whatever the light is being put on the sample, part of it will be absorbed and the remaining will be transmitted. The difference of those two will be directly calculated by the instrument and it will give you the output. So there is no questioning of subtracting manually here. Entirely the instrument itself will give you the readout. So we call that as double beam. So of late all the instruments are coming with double beam. So I'll show you how exactly you have to use the instrument.
Sure.
Hello, Naina ma'am.
Yes, sir.
We are not able to hear your video voice, ma'am, audio. Is there any
Yes,
audio
sir.
format?
Yeah. Is it fine now, sir?
Volume up, ma'am. Volume up, ma'am.
Is it heard now, sir?
Volume is less, huh?
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's okay, ma'am.
It's okay, ma'am.
It's okay, ma'am. You go ahead, ma'am.
You continue, but no problem. That's the maximum we can see that.
It's fine, ma'am. You go ahead, ma'am. No problem.
Sir, unable to hear the audio. It's not clear. Audio is not clear, sir.
Sir, can you hear or no?
Yeah, ma'am. Now we can hear, but this one is not properly hearing.
Ma'am, your system sound is not coming. Can you
Yeah, yeah.
please explain us?
Yeah, okay, sir. I'll just explain you again. I'll just mute the video of the audio of this and I'll explain the video what is happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
You can mute the audio of the video.
Yeah. Sir, you can see the spectrophotometer over here. And is it audible now?
You go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah. It's audible.
So this is
Audible.
the sample holder here. Where we place sample and the reference. So, and this is the display unit where we can see the display, and this is the keypad where we feed the data into the system. So here you are seeing the cuvette. These are made up of quartz. And this has two phases. One is the transparent phase, other one is the opaque phase. So always we have to make sure that the transparent phase is facing the light direction. And you should never touch the transparent phase, because any marks on the transparent phase will affect the light transmittance or the absorption. So always we have to keep it clean. So before keeping it in the instrument, always make sure you wipe it with a tissue paper and then keep it inside the instrument in the path of the light. So now we'll be switching on the instrument. It will take time to initialize. So whenever you're doing this initializing, you have to close the lid and then press enter. So the instrument will read the dark and it will autocorrect the wavelengths, and it will take 1 or 2 minutes of time. Yeah, here you can see there are 4 modes of operation. Once the wavelength gets adjusted, you can see the 4 modes of operation. You have single wavelength, multi-wavelength, then scan, and then time scan. So single wavelengths are usually used to detect the known wavelength of the ions, like nitrates, we use it at 410 nanometer. Fluoride, we use it at 480 nanometer. Iron, we go with 510 nanometer. So these are the different wavelengths. You can go for one when there is a single wavelength. Multi-wavelengths are used whenever you want to check the absorbance of a particular sample at 2 wavelengths. So whenever there is some interference, you can go for multi-wavelength and subtract 1 wavelength absorbance from the other. And you have scan range, where when you don't know what is the absorbance of a sample, then you can go for the scan, and whichever gives you the maximum absorbance, that can be taken as the wavelength for that particular element. And there is time scan, especially whenever there is some reactions going on in your sample. So over a period of time, how the concentration is going to change, you can measure it using the time scan. So these are the different 4 modes of operation. So for this particular thing, I'll be selecting the single wavelength mode. So I can select it as 1 and then press enter. So here it is asking you what is the wavelength you want to measure. Today I'll be showing you how we go for nitrate analysis. So I'll be selecting the wavelength as 410 nanometer. So I'll press enter. So there are 3 things which you want to measure. Either you can go for measurements of absorbance or transmittance, or directly you can get the concentration. So I'll go with absorbance here, because whenever you start the instrument, you have to always calibrate it. So I'll go for the calibration of the instrument first. So I'll select it as absorbance. So it is showing you that you are measuring the wavelength at 410 nanometer and the absorbance is recorded. So I'll press enter. So to ask you to give the number of the name of the sample, You can give it in terms of alphabets, or you can give it as 1, 2, 3. You can name the sample according to your requirement. I've selected it as 1 and I pressed enter. Now it is asking you to put both the reference and the sample which you want to analyze. So here I have prepared a series of nitrate standards, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 I have prepared, and I'll be taking first reference. So the reference sample is distilled water, where it does not contain any kind of salts. So I'll be filling the cuvette with the distilled water. So make sure that it doesn't spill out, and in case if it spills out also, please take a tissue paper and wipe the sides. The transparent side should be clear enough. So now open the holder, sample holder's cover, and place it in the reference side. So you should make sure that you can see when you just peep it into the instrument, you can see which side the light rays is coming. So on that open side, you have to place the sample. And please always hold it on the opaque face and place the cuvette inside the reference holder. Slightly, if you give a slight push, the cuvette is going to go inside. So similarly, we have to take the sample in another cuvette. So these are standard samples which are prepared as per the standard procedures. Those are available in the manuals, which you can refer it to prepare the standards. So again, that will be placed in the sample holder along the transparent side is along the path of the light ray. So the lid will be closed, and then we have to press enter. So any number of readings can be taken for the same sample. I will be taking the single reading. You can select it as 1 and then press enter. So for the photon nanometer, for that sample 1, we have got the absorbance as 1.191%. So similarly, we have to keep the other standards and then note down the absorbance of the different standards. So once the instrument is calibrated for the standards, the sample also is prepared in the similar manner, and then the sample also has to be placed inside the instrument, and the absorbance reading of the sample also has to be taken. So now what we have to do with the data which we have taken. So that is very important here. The calibration, whether we have done it properly or not, it all depends upon how well you have prepared your standard samples or how accurately you have prepared your standard samples. So slight variation even in milligram of salt which you are taking, it's going to affect the calibration. So you have to be very accurate while preparing the standard, and it has to be prepared as per the procedures. So here I have a set of data which is already there. Can you see, sir? Now the PPT is seen.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, ma'am.
These are the different standards where I have placed 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. There are 6 standards, and these are the absorbance readings which I have got from the instrument for the standards. So when I kept the sample, I don't know what is its concentration. I have got the absorbance reading as 0.506. Now first thing is, when you plot the concentration versus absorbance, always when you plot this, you have to get a linear trend of line. So to check whether it is linear trend of line or not, in the Excel you will get an R-square value. It should be approximately or nearly equal to 1. So if this is 0.8 or 1, something like that, it means that whatever the standards you have prepared are not accurate, and whatever the readings you are going to get from that are also not accurate. So always make sure that you prepare the standards properly, and accordingly when you take the absorbance readings, it should be a linear line. So your R-square value should be approximately equal to This is very important. Once you get this, then only you can proceed with the analysis of the sample. If you are not getting this R square as 1, it means that you have to repeat the calibration of the instrument. The instrument doesn't know anything. What the sample is or what it is in the instrument doesn't know anything. You are just feeding the instrument with some known concentrations which you are knowing, and the instrument will give you the absorbance reading for that. And when you keep the unknown sample, the instrument will give the absorbance reading for the unknown sample also. But what you have done is correct or not, it all depends upon the calibration which you are carrying out. So this stage is very important in any kind of analytical instrumentation analysis. Calibrating the instrument is must. Without calibrating, no analysis can be carried out. So for this readings, I have got the calibration is almost as 0.99, and I got the equation of a straight line y is equal to 0.0331x plus 0.1396. So here sample is having 0.506, that means y is 0.506, and when I solve for x, I'm going to get the concentration as 11.12 mg per liter. So this one example I've shown for the nitrate. Similarly, the other salts like chloride, chromium, or iron. So these type of analysis can also be carried out using the same procedures. Only the sample preparations will be different for different substances. Based on that, the samples have to be prepared. So we'll move on. Any doubts in this?
No, ma'am.
Participants,
Thanks.
any questions?
Okay, you can ask me later also in case if any doubts are there. So we'll move on with the next type of instrumentation analysis, that is the flame photometer. So this flame photometer is a branch of atomic spectroscopy. It's mainly used for inorganic chemical analysis for determining the concentration of metal ions. All your group 1 and group 2 elements of periodic table like calcium, sodium, potassium, barium, all these type of salts can be analyzed using flame photometer. So this instrument has different parts here, and here is the suction where you can see the nebulizer is there. Here is the suction pipe is there where the sample will be sucked inside the chamber, and in this chamber the mixing of the gas and the sample is going to take place. The gas is the fuel which you are using to burn the sample. So with both of them move towards the burner, and in the burner the mixture of your fuel and the sample is going to take place, and that will be burnt. So whenever this is burnt, will go with the right side part of the sketch here. The ion solution is aspirated, and whenever it is burnt, they vaporize in the flame and they get splitted into the different molecules. So whenever the heat is molecules absorb the heat, they get excited from the lower energy level to the higher energy level. So during this time, the heat energy gets absorbed and they get turned into the excited state. At the same time, they lose their energy in the form of light, and that light which is emitted will be measured using this photo detector. So same time it gets split into the different molecules. They get excited from the lower energy level to the higher energy level, and once they lose the energy from the higher to the lower, at that point of time they emit the energy in the form of light. That light will be measured depending upon the concentration of the salt. If the salt concentration is the more, the intensity of the light will be more. If the salt concentration is less, the intensity of the light will be less. So based on the concentration of the salt, the intensity will be given out from the sample. That will be detected by this photo detector, and then the readout is going to be in the form of digital output. So here, whenever you are introducing the sample into the system, it has to suck the sample. For that purpose, we use the compressor, which I'll be showing you in explaining the demo section. So through the compressor, the air will be sucked from the system, so the water will be aspirated inside the mixing chamber. So extra whatever the waste of the waste water will be there, that will be taken out from this drain tube which is provided in the instrument. So let's see how this instrument is actually working.
Any issues, ma'am?
No, I'm sharing the video. I'll mute the video and I'll speak it so that you'll be able to hear, sir. No issues.
Okay.
Okay, this is the flame photometer. So here you can see the suction pipe through which the sample will be sucked inside. And you have to always make sure that your pipe is always dipped inside the water. No air should enter inside this pipe so that the dust will get accumulated inside and it will affect the suction, this thing. So here, this is the burner. And this is the gas pipe where we supply the fuel to the instrument. And this is the compressor. And this compressor is connected to the pipe where the sample is being sucked so that the air will be drawn out and the sample will be sucked inside the instrument. So compressor should be like on, and when you on the compressor, the pressure should be between 0.4 to 0.6 kg per centimeter square, and that can be adjusted using the knob which is provided at the right side of that. By adjusting this knob, always your pressure will be set between 0.4 to 0.6 kg per centimeter square. So once the compressor is on, next thing is we have to allow the gas to flow inside and then on the burner. So behind the instrument, there is a knob which is provided to on the gas supply. So that has to be done using the knob which is provided at behind. So after on, switching it on, at the side of the instrument, there is a hole which is provided to insert the lighter. So through that hole, the lighter has to be inserted, and just like you light your gas stove, the similar way this also has to be lit. And once the gas is flame is on, you have to make sure that always that hole will be closed during the analysis. So now the gas burner is on. You can see the blue color flame. So if it is distilled water, if it doesn't contain any ions in them, normally the color of the flame will be blue in this thing. If it has any salts, then the color of that flame is going to change. For example, for sodium, you are going to get the yellow colored flame. So like for different types of elements, different colored flames are observed. So you have to always allow the instrument to stabilize or the flame to stabilize for 2-3 minutes, so that once the flame is stabilized, then you can switch on the instrument. So there is a switch behind the flame photometer to make the instrument on. So yeah, I have switched on the instrument and the instrument will initialize. And always ensure that this beaker is filled with water. So you can go for the menu button, and previously if some setups are stored and which you don't know which is that, you can always go for deleting all the setups and then press enter. So all your previous setups will be deleted. So next you have to go for the new setup. So press setup and ask you what setup number. You can give any number according to your will and then press enter. So now there are two modes of operation for this instrument. One is low concentration, another one is high concentration. So low concentration means the instrument will work in the range of 1 to 10 ppm, And high concentration means the instrument will work in a range from 10 to 100 ppm. So 100 ppm is the maximum which you can detect using this flame photometer. So here there are different series of sodium solutions have been prepared, 10, 30, 50, 80 and 100. So I have to go for editing here and I'll say 2 and press enter. So here there are different elements which you can analyze: sodium, calcium, potassium and lithium. This instrument has 4 filters inbuilt in it. So you can select any of these 4 analysis can be done using this particular flame photometer. The filters are available for the other things also, you have to purchase it separately. So here I'll be going for sodium analysis. So I'll press 1 and then press enter. It will ask you how many standards you want to use it for calibration. At least 2 standards has to be used minimum, and maximum only 5 standards are possible to calibrate the instrument. So depending upon how many standards you have prepared, you can select that and press enter. So first only you have to feed what are the concentration of those different standards manually here. So I have prepared 10, 30, 50, 80 and 100. So those values I'll be feeding here. Concentration 1 is 10. So all the 5 standards have to be entered. So next it will ask you what is the dilution factor. The standards are at the same concentration. I'll take it as 1 and press enter. Next, once you have entered all the data, next thing is you have to run the instrument. So press 3 and enter. So again it will ask you aspirate distilled water. So that is already in the distilled water. So I'll just press enter. So you can see the flame is of blue color here. So next it will ask you to aspirate reference solution. Again, reference solution is same as distilled water. Again, you have to press enter. So again, it will ask you distilled water. This process goes on for all the standards. Next, it will ask you to the aspirate standard number 1. Standard number 1 is 10 ppm. So we have to take 10 ppm standard in a small beaker, and I'll shift that suction pipe to the standard and then press enter. Now the standard is sucked inside and it will get mixed with the fuel and it will be burnt. So when it contains sodium ions, so when you see the flame, you can see that there is almost orange color flame. So this is an indication that that particular sample has sodium in it. If the concentration of the sodium increases also, you can see the intensity of the color is going to change. So likewise, again, it will ask you to aspirate in the distilled water, and next it will ask you to aspirate again the sample. You have to follow the steps which is shown on the display board. So likewise, you're going to calibrate the instrument, and once the instrument is calibrated, at the end of the calibration, at last it will ask you to aspirate the sample of unknown concentration. And when you aspirate the sample, directly it will give you what is the concentration of the sample. And if the sample is not in that particular range, it will not show you any reading. It means that either your sample is in the lower range or your sample is in the higher range. So at that point of time, either you have to go for dilution of the sample if it is in higher range, or you have to go for the lower concentration calibrations. So this was the procedure for using the flame photometer of type 128. So these are the different colored flames which are absorbed for different elements, seen for the different elements at different wavelengths. So like in the spectrophotometer where we use the calibration curve and all to plot the graph, here it is not there. The instrument itself will calibrate, and then whatever the sample you place, directly the concentration of the sample will be given by the instrument itself. There is no plotting the graph in case of flame photometer. One second. Yeah, this are the two instruments which I have showed you the demo. If any doubts are there regarding these two instruments, how to operate it or how to prepare the standards, you can ask me about it.
Yes, ma'am.